Well, hello. My name's Sean Hewitt. This is my colleague Sid Smith. We're here on episode 6 of the magnificent trek through the definitive Bob Dylan. And this week it's bringing it all back home. I'm in Nottingham. My colleague Sid is in Whitley Bay. I am the hypnotist collector, and Sid obviously is a walking antique. Those aren't my words. They're the words of Mr. Bob Dylan on this very LP, bringing it all back home, which we'll be discussing in our usual forensic manner very shortly. But first, a bit of slightly Bobbish news. I don't know if you've seen Get Back, the Beatles extravaganza. Have you seen that, Sid?
I have. It was a life-changing experience.
I thought it was magnificent. But in the first episode of that, the Beatles sing 3 Bob Dylan songs. They sing The Mighty Quinn. They sing I Shall Be Released. And I think George does Mama, You've Been on My Mind. I thought I'd just mention that Bob is everywhere and always has been. And did you enjoy hearing those songs?
To be honest, they just passed me by.
Well, I'll move on then. Well, this is the 6th in the series in a sequence devised by the deranged masters of the world behind the definitive Bob Dylan series. And it is, in fact, the 6th in the series and the 5th album. So last episode, we did the album after this, in what is becoming a familiar trope of our series. The magazine is, as usual, rubbish. And one thing I will say about this album, it's the last album produced by Tom Wilson, who's been producing Bob now for some years. Well, I say some years. This entire career so far lasts 3 years. We're on album 6. This album, I think, is beautifully produced by Tom. I don't know why Tom and Bob stopped working together. I've thought for years it was Bob and Tom falling out. I am led to believe by reading something I've read this week, it might not be Bob and Tom falling out. It might be Tom and Albert Grossman falling out. So that, as we shall see in future episodes, is a completely different matter. But this is the first electric album. A lot of the impact of the electric era, which was seismic in this career, we dealt with last time. But this caused a bit of consternation among the folkies, as we'll call them, with a bit of irony, well, what I'm going to say later on, because the first side of this album is completely electric. He's playing with an electric band with one exception of one track on a previous album, the first time in his career. And when you've heard things like Desolation Row and things like that, and earlier songs like The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll and Chimes of Freedom, to suddenly be confronted by the beat-tastic subterranean homesick blues that owns this record must have been a bit of a shock for some people. But they were lucky, because if they were sitting there wondering, but what has he done? He's turned into a kind of rock and bop group, which is not what we wanted. We wanted him to be serious. They could just flip this record over, and there are, in fact, 4 totally acoustic songs. So this is like him dipping his toe in the water, if you like, in the first of what is regarded now as a bit of a trilogy. Bob often does phases of 3 albums. We'll discuss this in more detail as we go on. But I think this is a great album. I think its seismic impact is somewhat diminished by the passing decades. So we know now he did this. We know now what happened. We know about the booing, which happened the year after this. But I thought this was a pretty great list and a brilliant production by Tom Wilson, who, I repeat, I think is a better producer than Bob Johnston. You're wearing a Soft Machine t-shirt. Tom Wilson produced the Soft Machine. He produced the first Frank Zappa album, Freak Out. So he's by no means someone who prefers acoustic music exclusively to electric music. He's the man who put the drums on The Sound of Silence, after all, for Simon and Garfunkel. So he's well into it. So that's not the reason. I don't know what the reason is. Maybe someone knows, and will write us in, pop it on a postcard and let us know. But what did you think of this one, Sid?
So the first time I heard Subterranean Homesick Blues, consciously heard it, was sometime in the early 70s. I went to an all-night film show where they were screening kind of rock films. And one of the rock films they screened was Don't Look Back.
Oh, yeah, I've got that. Yeah, it was a great film.
Yeah, with Donald Sutherland and and
that's a different film, Sid. In almost every conceivable way, that's a different film.
What's Bob Dylan doing wearing that red duffel coat? I don't know what's going on. Anyway.
Yeah, he is everywhere. That's
anyway, so there's the classic scene where he's in the alleyway and he's doing the thing with the cards. I remember being in the cinema, and I think that possibly was the first time I'd heard that song like properly, you know. And it was in a cinema, quite loud, and very witty. And because some of the film, as you know, is set in Newcastle. So I thought when I first saw that film of Bob standing there doing the thing with the cards, I thought it was filmed in the alleyway next to the City Hall in Newcastle.
Obviously, yeah. But he's made the whole film here.
But apart from the fact that Allen Ginsberg is stood standing in the background, but never mind. So
it's the Savoy Hotel in London.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. So, but at the time, you know, it was and actually, it had a bit of impact on me. I've got to say, so the premise for often for our discussions is, you know, you're a Bob Dylan fan, and I'm not much of a Bob Dylan fan. You know, I respect his place in the pantheon, all of that bullshit. I'm
great band, Pantheon, great band.
I'm skeptical about the whole, you know, sort of beatification of him as a poet of the times, etc., etc. But what I will say is this album, I love this album from start to finish. I don't think it's unlike some of the albums that we've listened to in the series. You know, I have had a copy of this previously, so I'm fairly familiar with it. And what I like about the album is it feels very complete. And although there is that separation between the electric side and the acoustic side, it feels very complementary, and it really fits together beautifully. In a way, can you remember there was a bit of, I mean, nothing like the Dylan Goes Electric furore, but can you remember when David Bowie did Low, and there was one side of Low was, you know, kind of relatively upbeat songs, and then the other side was these moody, strange instrumentals, you know. It sort of has a bit of that energy for me, you know.
I've not thought of that. That's a good point.
It has that charge of the first side, but then the second side dials it down. However, it dials down the dynamics, I think. But I think there's something about, maybe it's because, you know, there's a residual current left over from the electricity side of the album, but I do think the performances on side 2 and the songs on side 2 are really very good. There's several moments which I think are spellbinding, and although side 1 has all the, you know, the drama, if you want, you know, it's got all that rangy kind of skiffly madness going on, very quick and makeshift, and I like that. Nevertheless, I think side 2 has this kind of momentum going for it, which, you know, really pulls you in, and it does have some beautiful tender moments within it, which are just exquisite. I I think the other thing that strikes me about this album is I think compared to what we've had, in the run up to this album, if you were just listening to them chronologically, so this would have come as a bit of a shock at the time to people, and I understand that, but I think the melodic content of this album is incredibly strong, and possibly, I would argue, probably strongest to date, to this point. Very often the songs are a bit of a ratchety acoustic guitar dirge with him going kind of over the top of it. Whereas I think actually with this album, he's trying to write proper songs with proper melodies in place. Yes. I mean, there's plenty of dirgy going on for those who like the for the fans
like that. Yeah.
But actually, there's some nice melodies on this album, and you can't always say that about a Bob Dylan album.
So I think on side one, in She Belongs to Me and Love Minus Zero No Limit, those are two of his best love songs.
Yeah,
I think they're I think Love Minus Zero is I think it's the first song he writes about the woman who will very shortly after this become his wife, Sarah. I think that's the first song he writes for her. But they're both great songs. And for the allegedly I'm Gonna Rock Now side, I think they really stand out as very well executed indeed. Side one includes my least favourite well-known Bob Dylan song. And that is, everyone knows it, it's Maggie's Farm. And I've always been slightly bored by Maggie's Farm. And I'll go further. I think Bob sounds a bit bored when he's singing it. And that's a song that's never really gone away. It's been in loads of set lists ever since. And it just leaves me cold. And I don't know why. I know everyone, it's quite popular and it's a classic. It's one of these iconic songs, particularly in this country in the Thatcher era. Every Tom, Dick or Harry was doing a cover version of Maggie's Farm, because I tell you what, Sid, they ain't going to work on Maggie's Farm no more. I've always found it a bit of a boring drag. I don't know what you think about that song. But even the lesser songs, I mean, the first four songs on side one, I think are in his very, very well-known classic collection. Outlaw Blues, On the Road Again, and Bob Dylan's 115th Dream aren't quite of that stature. Oh. But I do think they're tremendous fun. And I also think he's done a lot of these songs, long, rambling comic tales. Yeah. But Bob Dylan's 115th Dream is really funny. And it starts off with that false start and everyone's laughing. And it just sets up the mood for that song perfectly, because he's having a laugh. And it's what we see on Highway 61 Revisited. It's the absurdity he sees in modern America. And when he meets Columbus at the end, he just says to him, good luck. But for all that, I'm going to agree with you. I think I'm siding a bit with the focus here, because I think the acoustic side is stronger. I think the acoustic side there's four songs and they're all great. Yeah, all those songs are great. Mr. Tambourine Man, everybody knows that. I mean, what can you say? I mean, it's just a great. Everyone knows it. It's memorable from the first moment. Gates of Eden, I know it's what you don't like, this kind of earnest kind, but it really works. There's some great lines in it, and It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding is one of his best songs. I think it's one of his all-time great songs, and he starts off this imagery. It just never stops. It just inventively all the way through, and It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, I've always thought is lovely as well. I think that's a lovely little gentle ending to the album. Yeah. So ironically, for all his innovation on this album, what he does on side two, I think, is the peak of his solo acoustic treatment of his own material, which he never does again. He does the odd song acoustic, but he never does a side of an album, let alone a whole album, where he's totally solo and acoustic ever again. And I think he goes out of that style on a real high. Yeah, on this album.
I think I would agree with a lot of that. Actually, I do think side two is. I don't think there's a a duff moment on it. I think
No.
Even you know, I have a bit of customer resistance to certain
Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan, yes. But you're right. They are great songs, and that's what I was trying to get at earlier on when I was, it seems like sometimes with Bob Dylan, it's kind of like he's done this typing, and he's basically got to find some kind of some rhythm, some tune that in order to put his typing to music, and so he grabs at the first thing, and he does his hollering of his typing over a fairly rudimentary, not really particularly very exciting, and very often wholly static a bit of guitar. These songs don't feel like that. They feel more considered. They feel more like it's not just typing set to music. It feels like they feel like songs to me, and I think that's why they work for me. Purely on a kind of, there's no objectivity about it. It's pure subjectivity. That's why they work for me. I feel like they're in a song. And there's the last track on the second side, Baby, It's All Right. What's it called? Baby Blue?
It's all over now, Baby Blue.
Yeah. I there's something about that phrase. It's one of those songs. I don't know what it's about. And honestly, I don't give a fuck.
I don't care what it's about, because it just works.
There's something about the shape and that refrain. There's a power in that refrain. It's where he kind of manages to, it comes in and it beds down and it gets under the skin, and it's all over now, Baby Blue. It just feels really good. There's something kind of quasi profound about it, although you can't actually say why it feels profound, but it feels right on some kind of level. I've no idea what it's about and what he's going on about. And the other song, I'm terrible with the names of songs. It's not just Bob Dylan. I can guarantee you, if we were talking about King Crimson, I wouldn't know the names of the songs without referring to them. Gates of Eden. I just wanted to mention Gates of Eden. I think Gates of Eden's a fantastic song. And I remembered when I was listening to it for, on this edition, which, by the way, I think sounds great. It's a
great pressing.
It's another great pressing. It really sounds. Somebody asked me online about how these pressings sound, and I would say that if you see a Bob Dylan album in the newsagents, get it, because they sound excellent. But Gates of Eden, when I was listening to it, it reminded me of Roy Harper did an album called Flat Baroque and Berserk in I think 1970. Maybe need to look that up. And there's so much of that album. I mean, I love Roy Harper. I absolutely adore Roy Harper. But there's something about Gates of Eden where you can hear quite on a couple of tracks from Flat Baroque and Berserk, you can hear the Dylan influence very strongly. I think Harper actually, he's not ever doing a Dylan knockoff. He takes that influence and really twists it and does something that's unique to him. But I think that the reason I wanted to mention it was because I think I know this is obvious to Bob Dylan fans, but I just think Dylan's influence, is so far and wide, and it's so deeply embedded into the culture. And so, if I could just say that about, so there's a kind of a folk influence with Roy Harper taking the Dylan thing. The other thing that happens is our old friends, the Nice. They do a version of She Belongs to Me, which is a great version on the album that's called The Nice. And actually, I think that may be a 1970 album as well. I haven't prepared. And then the other thing, of course, is the Mr. Tambourine Man, and of course the Birds. Now that's the first version. I heard that when it came out. It was that combination of all those kind of jangly guitars and those harmonies. That had a profound effect on me, even as a very small child. It really went into me. So I just think, for no other reason, if you just take those three quite disparate examples of songs that bed into the culture at different times, and they go in quite deep and they spur things on, credit to him. I think he creates a piece of music and then it really lives outside of his world, and it has an independence that's free of him almost. It's free of him. So yeah, I rate this album a lot, and if I had to pick one Bob Dylan album, it could be this one, maybe.
Well, there's an album the Uncut people put out earlier this year called The Complete Bob Dylan, and they do their rundown of all the albums, and I think they picked this as their number one.
Oh, really?
Their favourite Bob Dylan album, yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll see what we think of as we go on, but it's certainly up there.
Yeah,
it's certainly up there, this record, because it shows at this stage just about everything he can do at this stage. And I think for that alone, the fact you've got something like Gates of Eden and something like Subterranean Homesick Blues on the same record is tremendous achievement. And I think, as you say, hats off to Bob.
Yeah, yeah. What's the one track for you that you would pick as the standout track that really works for you?
This is so difficult on this album because there's so many good ones.
Yeah.
And I had a real job picking, but I think just like you've been saying, it's all emotional. It's all to do with memories. It's all to do with how you remember these songs. I think it's all right. I'm only bleeding. I think the first recorded version I had of that was on a much later record, the 1974 live album he made with the band called Before the Flood. And in that album, he does a solo acoustic set. It was the first tour he'd done since the 66 famous tour. He hadn't toured for 8 years.
Yeah.
And so the band do sections and he does sections, and most of his sections are backed by the band, but there is a section of several songs he just does totally acoustic, and there's a tremendous version of that song. And I've always, that from the minute I heard that version, I've always loved that song, and he sings it with real ferocity and the audience really respond. So I think for me it's the jangling images, the relentless pulse, and the force of "It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding." What's yours?
Do you know, when we've done this in the other episodes, it's been fairly easy, to go for the one album, and I would say I really struggled to kind of pick one track. Part of me, I kind of wanted to pick Subterranean Homesick Blues for all the obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And a song like, sorry, I keep forgetting the names of things. Love Minus Zero. I think that's a great song.
It's a lovely song.
Yeah. So the point being, you're spoilt for choice in terms of, picking one song.
Yeah, I think that's true.
But and I was going to go for It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, because of this. It's so poetic, and the sound of it. I mean, it's so poetic, and whoever's playing the bass guitar on that track, there's Bob on solo on his acoustic, and there's somebody playing bass. I don't know who it is. And it
doesn't stay, does it?
And it's lovely little embellishments, which really work. However, I think the track that I would plump for, and I'm sorry to say, it's not very exciting.
Oh dear!
And that's Mr. Tambourine Man. And,
Really?
And only because I mean, I love the Byrds version of it, and because that's the first version I ever heard and knew, and I've loved it forever. But there's, when I was listening to it, I thought, man, that's a gorgeous moment. That's so intimate. And again, it's Bob, but there's somebody, again, I don't know who, but there's another guitarist who's just adding electric guitar, who's just adding a sort of almost like a gossamer sort of sparkle to some of the lines. And it just fills it out without filling it out, without going over the top. It's so restrained. And for me, it's like a perfect moment of reverie. And I get, when I was listening to Dylan singing it, I was very emotionally affected by it. In a
really?
way
That's interesting.
In a way that I've never been previously. But on this occasion, I listened to it just the other day, not yesterday, the day before, and I found myself moved by it. So I'm just following my heart, and I'm going with Mr. Tambourine.
It's the only way to go.
And I know Mr. Tambourine Man's like, everybody knows it, big hit, but that's what I'm going for.
You're quite right to appreciate it. I mean, I'm one of those people who's heard it so often it tends to wash over you a bit. When you're too familiar with something, it does breed contempt. But just another word about influence, just before we finish. Subterranean Homesick Blues. It's not an original idea. He's taken that from older bluesy songs, but the way he does it is a great influence on like Pump It Up by Elvis Costello and the Attractions years later, and even as late as 2009 there's a not a very good record by U2 called Get Off of Your Boots or something it's called, and that's quite blatantly taken from Subterranean Homesick Blues, which Dylan actually mentioned, and I say they've been listening to Bringing It All Back Home, and for something like that to an audience who won't even recognise the reference, I still think it's quite an influential piece of work.
Robert White put an album out in the 90s called Sleep, which I think was co-produced by Brian Eno, possibly. And
yes, it was.
I think he did it. Was it Bob in Blues in Bob Minor? And I think it's a Liszt song. And I think at the time White said it was influenced by Bob Dylan. So there you go. Anyway, right, there we are.
Right, well, it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, well.
And next time, we'll be talking about Blonde on Blonde. So I'm sure we'll have some words to talk about that. So we'll have strong words to say about that record, I think.